John Knocklinger, the men's divorce coach and mentor. You can join our free men's divorce support group at mensdivorcenetwork.com. Today, my guest is Scott Orr. He's the owner of the law offices of Scott W. Orr in Ridgewood, New Jersey. Scott handles divorce and family law matters with an emphasis on divorce mediation. His philosophy is to make his philosophy for his clients is to make an empowering choice and own their outcome. I love it. I wish I had come up with that phrase myself because I believe in the same thing. He's going to talk to us today about his own experience with divorce and why divorce mediation is a better way to divorce. You can find out more about Scott at scorrlaw.com. Thank you so much for being here today, Scott.
Well, lots happened since that introduction. I actually have joined a new law firm, so I got to update you. I'm at Torchin, Martel & Orr. I'm not on my own anymore.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah, I know. Crazy, right? The website's tmolawfirm.com, but same principles, same philosophies, and very excited to join up with like-minded individuals. But thank you so much for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we'll put your new information in the show notes. And so Scott already, he's had his own law firm, so he's really gotten to deal with everything that goes on with owning a law firm, and now he's with another firm. So he's very well-rounded, as we like to say.
Yeah.
But let's start kind of you're a divorce attorney and you do divorce mediation. Scott, why in the world are you doing this? Like, this is not the easiest area of law to do. So what made you want to do this crazy area of law?
Well, John, I had my own divorce and it was awful. And I've been a lawyer at that time. I was a lawyer for 12 or 13 years in the corporate world. And, I felt like a babe in the woods, and I felt completely, I don't want to say manipulated, but completely sort of naked to the process. And having gone through it, coming through on the other side, it was almost a heartbeat, or it feels like that, although it was a couple of years, that I just decided to shift and say, it's not how it's supposed to be. So I made that change right then and there, if you will. Again, it was a little bit afterwards because I had kids to feed and mouths to feed and new things to do. But my own divorce sort of put me in that direction. And having now done this for, I don't even know how many years, I often say if I ever changed careers, I only have one option left, and that would be a hostage negotiation, I think.
How many years have you been doing family law?
So I was divorced myself. I think it was completed in 2009 or 2010. I will say, guys out there, it does tend to blend. You really you think you can remember these dates and these times and these events, but it just all blends. It's almost like if you have kids, remember, if you think about it, you were up all night a couple times with them, but you don't really remember that, but it was there. So I've been doing mediation since I think around 2013 or 14. Doing family law full time since around 2017, 2016. But yeah, I started my own practice. I didn't want the leather bound books. I didn't want to put it out there. I just wanted it to be real, because that was the thing that really confused me. Was it didn't seem real. It seemed like I had my own lawyer. My wife at the time had her own lawyer. The court was involved. Everybody was wearing a nicer suit than me, and there were leather-bound books and talks behind doors. And I said, I'm not supposed to be like this. This is my life. This is my car. I'm supposed to be driving. But I gave into the whole process. So how I practice, I guess, John, is sort of like, the Wizard of Oz, except my curtain's open the whole time. I don't know.
Less smoke probably too.
Yeah, less smoke. Yeah, less smoke.
That's interesting. So you haven't done this so long that you're really jaded yet about divorce and family law. But we'll talk to you again in about 10, 15 years and see how we're doing. But I really find it interesting though, Scott. You went through a divorce and now you became a divorce attorney, but you really want to make the process better for people because of what you went through. Correct. So I think, what's the one thing that everyone is scared of when they start divorce is, what's it going to mean for me? And am I going to be okay? Like they're kind of variations on that. So go ahead.
Yeah, no. First of all, I think going through your divorce is kind of like the equivalent of being a divorce attorney on yourself for about every month that you're in a divorce is about a year of practicing.
Mhm.
But I will say that it's all going to be okay. Like you may not feel it, you may not think it, you may not, but my job, my role is to help you take the emotion out of it and be the pragmatic part of it. And what I felt was, or what I see often is that too often the attorney plays the role of you stay there and I'll have this and everything will work out or it won't. The truth is that it's like a bell curve. Your best case, your worst case, your likely case scenario is where it's going to end up. And I don't want to be so bold to say we know that going in because we don't, because every divorce is a snowflake, but more or less the outcome's going to be. And I think, John, one of the things that really confused me is I was a little bit younger when I was going through all this, and I didn't have any peers to turn to. And I always thought, wow, it would have been great if I had people to talk to about this and all these things. But the truth is that, that may have been a blessing in disguise, because when I do get clients that are man or female, male or female, talking to all their peers, well, she got this, or I don't get the kids, or whatever. You don't know the intricacies and details. There is no playbook that you can there are laws, but it's a family court's a court of equity. So you don't know what it is. So here I was getting divorced, and I thought, based on TV shows, my parents and whatever, that I was going to be living in a garden apartment, taking my kids to Friendlies on Wednesday night and maybe having an overnight on the weekend. Meanwhile, I got them full time. Um, and I'm not saying that as if I won. The concept is you want two healthy parents and co-parenting relationship, and your kids to have that, relationship with both. But I'm just saying that you've got to sort of understand that this is not you on the sidelines in your divorce. So if you're fearful of things, or your conjecture, your friends, stop. Talk to the professional that you've hired, whether it's the mediator or whether it's an attorney, and just walk them through.
Yeah,
How does this affect me?
that is so important. It's
Yeah.
interesting that you were saying about everyone's preconceived notions about what's going to happen to them. I mean, just today,
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to new clients where I've heard that lovely issue of, well, abandonment. So if someone leaves the house, I get it. I heard that, it's a 3-year-old child, so mother automatically gets custody. I've heard, don't I have to, she doesn't get any alimony because she works. Like I've
Right.
heard all of those urban myths
Yeah.
just today. And you're like, so it's out there on the internet, which is really why it's so important that you go hire someone who knows what they're doing, which is the whole, we could have that conversation for another
Yeah.
five
It's true.
hours.
Yeah.
But
And
go ahead.
when selecting the attorney, because I know that's kind of the process. My own divorce is, I sort of just went with somebody that my dad's friend recommended. And I think that really hurt me. It helped me because I wound up doing my own divorce in theory. But at the same time, what would my kids say? You got to vibe, you got to gel, you got to feel you're in the right place. But you also have to understand, John, right? You get what you pay for, right? There is a reason that certain lawyers are more expensive than others. There's a reason why somebody can be the least expensive on the block or something to that effect. Just really sort of feel it out. And even if you meet with John right away, let's say, and you love John, go meet with a couple people too, because it's that important that you just get like, yeah, and I've dated a lot of pretty girls, and the next day they weren't so pretty, So it's like, what why was that? Was I in a moment? Was I, So get your feel and understand. And then I think, John, one of the things I didn't do is I didn't ask the hard questions going in. I thought I was just turning it over. When I go to the dentist, I don't look where the dentist went to, dental school, or my doc at that time. But now I'm like, hey, where'd you go to school? Who'd you practice with? Who do you go to get your teeth fixed? Like, that's sort of where you've got to really understand you're turning something over that you still control, but who are you turning that thing over to? I don't know if that answers the questions
No,
really
it
helpful.
does. But I mean, I talk to guys I coach all the time about, don't just look for the answers that you want to hear to. Like,
Right.
when you're talking to these professionals, make sure that they're giving you a real honest answer. And an honest answer from any attorney should be, it depends, or arrange, or that could happen, but this could happen. Like, if someone's telling you, if you go in and you say, I want custody of my kids, and they say, absolutely, we're going to get you custody of your kids, get up and walk out, because we've both been doing this long enough to tell anyone who's listening, no attorney can guarantee you what's going to happen when it comes to custody. I mean, probably the only time you could guarantee that is if, I don't know, maybe one parent is in prison for murder and is never going to get out. I mean, it'd have to be something.
That sounds good.
Right? Other than that, we really can't guarantee it. But, it's really important, that you don't just, listen to your friends and say, oh, go to this attorney. They got me this and they got me that. And blah, blah, blah. It's a bunch of nonsense. But a lot of people do that because they don't know any better. It's the same reason why people go on the internet and they type in best divorce attorney in my city, and they just, whatever pops up first, they call, they make their appointment, and they hire them.
Right.
It's the same reason. It's just people are lazy, number one, and they have this misconception that all attorneys are created equal, which we know is not the case.
Right.
But I think let's go back a little bit more, Scott, and so people can understand kind of how you got to the point where you were selecting an attorney.
Yeah.
So when were you married, and do you have any children?
I was married in 2000. And I have 3 kids. My oldest is about to turn 21st, so undertaking that whole thing. I've got another one who's going to turn 20, and then I've got an idiot son who's 15. They're great kids. I'm kidding. Things sort of started out a little rough, and you kind of think they're going to get better and all those types of things. And, what I often tell people is when they come to us, John, you're coming to the coroner, not the doctor, for your marriage, right? Whether we're mediating or we're, going to represent you. Our goal isn't to make her or make him realize how great you are, or how this should stay, you're married, or something to that effect. So I often tell people, like, if you're not ready, that's okay. But here's maybe one of the things you can try. Have you tried therapy? Have you tried this? Have you tried those types of things? And, I'll also say, like, what's your concern? What's keeping you from doing this? And not that I'm a therapist, but, if people give, and I still love him, or I still love her, or I'm not ready to give this up, those are honest things. If somebody says, well, the kids will be damaged if we get divorced, or I don't make any money, like, we only spin around this sun a couple times. Like, those, you don't worry about that. The green stuff's just paper. It's unlimited. I mean, we saw during COVID, how much did our country make of it, right? And then in terms of your kids, like I always tell people, it's better to be from a broken home than in one. So what lessons are we teaching our kid? And everybody will say, I don't know, are we allowed to curse here? I don't even know. But people always say, like, I'm going to fuck up my kids if I get divorced. I don't want them to be fucked up. And, like, the truth is, we don't know. You may be fucking them up more by staying in this marriage than getting out. And I'll be honest with you, in my case, and I can't speak for other people, I became a better father being divorced because I was no longer worried about the certain, I don't want to say rules, but the outcomes I was looking for, or, the temperament that I had to deal. It was the way that I wanted to parent. And I've got 3 very successful, beautiful children. My oldest one is a junior. She's only got a 3.98 at a top 30 school. My next one's pre-med with a 3.8. And my little guy is, doing great too, I think. I don't know. I'm checking. But my point is that, I've been divorced. He was, 3 or something? I mean, it just, you never know. So those fears that you have are just, you're looking too far ahead.
Yeah, well, as I always like to say, children need happy parents, not married parents. So, I mean,
true.
And I think
that, John, they only need one sane parent. I know that sounds horrible, but likely you think the other person's the one who's insane as you're going through this. They need you to be sane. You've got to be that rock for them. They don't. You cannot involve them in this. I see it so much. Your mother's the one that wanted this, or your father's the one, I didn't want this. You should tell them, like, don't involve them. Let that process work itself out.
Well, because Scott, that's because all women are bipolar and all men are narcissists. Didn't you know that?
Yes, and every guy is gas lamping, and every woman is, it's like it's crazy, the amount of narcissism. He's a narcissist, and he's in gaslights or gas lamps. I mean, I can't even tell you. It's almost in the first conversation every time.
Almost always, almost always. Well, it's interesting. So, I think you said a lot of great things, Scott, but I really want to know what happened with you. Like, did you, like, when you were leading up to a divorce, what was going on? Did you try marriage counseling? What things led you to the point that you were getting divorced? Did you want it? Did she want it? Just tell us a little bit about what happened with
Okay.
you.
So it was awful, and it's tough to relive it. I'm not going to lie. There were some substance challenges that were involved, and I'm a fixer, so and I don't come from a line of divorced parent. I didn't even know the D word, kind of existed. So I sort of did everything that I could, and then there was a certain point where I realized I've done everything I could, and I'm not going to regret making this next decision and doing these types of things. Oddly enough, she initiated it, but that wound up being a blessing as well. I kind of fought it kicking and screaming, and it turns out it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, not only emotionally, financially, believe it or not, even though I didn't have a pot to piss in coming out of it, but there were no more Pottery Barn boxes lined up, every day. And I was able to sort of control myself and change careers from there. So in terms of the decision, I tell people basically what I said to myself, and that is, if you're 51%, that's enough, right? You're never going to be, look, she could be cheating on you. She could have a boyfriend. She could have taken all your money, and still you're not sure. That's the bottom line. You're never going to be 100% sure, but you've got to circle back and say, do I want to be like this for the next whatever amount of years? Do I want to feel like this? Do I want to emote like this? Do I want my children to see this? Is this what I hate to say the word deserve, because I don't know, but if your day's worried about how someone else feels, then that sounds a little backwards, right? What do they tell us when we're on the plane? In order to save your kids with the oxygen mask, you got to save yourself first. In order to be in a happy marriage, you got to make sure you're happy. And if the marriage is the source of you being unhappy, that's a problem. It's a problem. So.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I like to, you said 51%. I think the second you start to like have those daydreams about what life would be like if you weren't married to this person, yeah. I think that's always your sign. Because I mean, that means everything in your subconscious is now bubbled up to your consciousness, and you're starting to think about it. And then what's going to happen? You're just going to start getting more and more irritated by everything your spouse does, and it's just going to snowball, and then your kids are going to see it. That's the big thing. I just had a conversation right before we started recording with a potential client, where I basically had to have a mindset conversation about this exact topic, because you're right. People are so concerned about what the divorce is going to do to their kids without thinking about what the marriage is doing to their kids.
Right.
And it's really interesting that people can't see that. They think they can see it clearly that the divorce is going to screw up their children, but they don't even think for a second about the marriage screwing up their kids. Do you see that a lot with people that come to you, Scott?
Yeah, I find that, and this happened to me. I know we want to talk about me too, but what happens is you have such a narrow focus, and one of the things, John, I think I may have even talked to you when I coach, if you will. I know I'm not a divorce coach per se, but when I'm, divorce to me, to my clients, I try to explain to them, this isn't the finish line. Divorce is the starting line for the rest of your life. And so much comes with the divorce when they look at it so myopically in terms of, I got to get there, I got to win, I got to get this, that you lose complete sense of self. All you're doing is talking to your friends and family about divorce. They don't want to hear it anymore. You're a curmudgeon when you have your kids because you got to return them in an hour, or she's late dropping them off. You're wasting your time being present with your children. She's going to do this, she's going to do that, he's going to do that. You don't know what's going to eventually happen. Like, come back. There was a reason you got married, right? That you could talk at a certain point. Maybe if you realize that you both kind of think you know the best, thing and the outcome, and maybe you can bring this down and not have to fight, then you can have some control in this. But it's very difficult when people look at this also job, you got to focus. I became so focused on my job at the time that I essentially lost my job. I'm so focused on my divorce that I almost lost my job at the time, which was another reason I, sort of pivoted, because I was, when I talk about internet, I built spreadsheets and this and that. I was doing everything to figure out, what things are going to be. So, you've got to trust that you're working with someone that's put you in a good position, has explained to you the best worst case scenario. You've got to act as if. Don't change the status quo. Don't be a dick. Just because the other side maybe doesn't mean you have to. I mean, John, one of the things that I really do pride myself on is that no matter how difficult it got, and trust me, I could cry for an hour and a half, I stayed on that road no matter how high and how narrow that got. I didn't do things, I didn't make, do things with money. I didn't go to strip clubs. I didn't date. I didn't, do this. I kept the focus on the kids, and I didn't go back. I didn't talk shit. I was called this. And there was a time, I think it was like 2 weeks straight, where I gave 3 answers when we were communicating. It was, oh, no, and I'm sorry you feel that way. And I said it with empathy, like, I'm sorry you feel that way, because instead of fighting, I can't teach a monkey how to speak. So it's like, there's nothing, I consider myself an okay speaker, pretty bright. There's nothing I'm going to say where it's going to be, I could write the Magna Carta. She's just not going to change her mind. She's like, oh my God, Scott, for the last decade, I can't believe I didn't hear you. I finally hear you. No, it's not going to change. So, focus on yourself. But you don't have to be a dick, even if the other side's being a dick. You don't have to. That's some of the stuff. Also, I know this is kind of weird to say, but if you're having an affair, that's likely another sign that you probably don't want to be married. Your other side, your spouse probably won't admit that there's any fault in you having, moved from one book to another. But, we know it's not you 100%, but that will become the focus for a short time or a long time of your divorce. Right. No matter how good a person you are, if you cheat, that becomes sort of the narrative. Mm-hmm. So, if you're in a position, back to what John said, if you're sort of leaning, if you're feeling like you're going to cheat, maybe that's the time before you cheat that you say, hey, dear, things aren't going well. I'm not feeling great. Can we talk about this? Maybe even, talk about this with somebody. Because it may surprise the other person, or she may or he may be like, thank God, I'm feeling the same way. At least then you're sort of in it. But if you have that affair and she finds your text or sees your picture, fucked. It's going to be the worst divorce. It's going to be the worst, 90 days. Then you're going to be in a position where you're thinking, oh, I got to be super nice to try and win her back, or give this or give that. And that's not the case either. Guilt shouldn't play a part in your divorce.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's interesting, people cheat for a number of reasons. Yeah. And, usually, it might be just like you're totally done with somebody and you're just looking to escape. Sometimes It's just the intimacy is gone. Maybe just, you have all these kids. Now life has sort of taken over and you're just not with them anymore and you're feeling lonely, or whatever the case is.
Whatever it is.
But there's a reason why there's things called marriage therapists. There really are. And another thing too, I've talked about this with other mental health professionals that I've had on the show, don't discount the fact that even though you're going through a divorce, that you might not still benefit from some kind of couples therapy as it relates to parenting. People forget
family therapy is huge,
right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's, anyway, going back to your situation, did you get a therapist while you were going through this, or how
we tried marriage therapy a few times, and each time it was the therapist who was so wrong and not listening and all this stuff. You get to that point too where somebody doesn't want to listen, that you can't move on either. And what I tell clients and what I told myself when I went to those 3 things, oh no, and I'm sorry you feel that way. I heard something and somebody had said it to me and said, would you rather be happy or would you rather be right? Because it's not often and always that you can have both. Because in order to prove that I was right, in this instance, I couldn't be happy. And at the end of the day, what's more important, right? And I tell people, like, and when it comes down to somebody else's divorce, you want to spend $50,000 to be right, and get, or do you want to just be happy and just spend 10 grand and be done? This is, you got to sort of let go of your ego a little bit to get through this, because you got to figure out what's in that urgent and important quadrant. And for me, John, when I was going through this, I had seen enough bad things for my kids, whether it was how I was acting, how I was being, how she was being, how they were. And I was like, this can't go on. Now, would I have done things differently now than I did things then, in terms of, my attorney basically had me fearful that I wasn't going to get the kids. Now I'd be like, she should be fearful she's going to see them, kind of thing. But my point is that you've got to figure out what the main thing is. And as long as you keep your eye on that, you're going to be in a much better shape than trying to win everything. Right. And that's where you do with your lawyer.
Well, what about, did you have a therapist, like a personal therapist, while you were going through your divorce?
Yeah, I did. I do. That I found somebody who had, again, for me, it was somebody who had been divorced, because I do feel that somebody who's gone through this, whether it's your mediator, your lawyer, or whatever, I think it sort of changes the tenor and tempo of how you can communicate. This is really the most painful death without anybody dying that you'll likely go through. And, that therapist, was it very helpful? Probably not as helpful as another therapist may have been, or whatever. But, revealing a little bit my story, I was going to these rooms called Al-Anon. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of those, but it's like when your life is affected by someone who has alcoholism. And those rooms is kind of what propelled me or saved me conceptually. That was my therapy. But once you realize that your goal is to fix you and not to hurt her or him, you're just in a better place. And it just may not be, I'm not saying like your lawyer shouldn't be fighting for you or advocating for you, but what was it won't mean a thing in 100 years, right? Your memory is going to be your kids and your grandkids, not your divorce. And if you don't have kids, you probably just want to get out as quickly as you can and move on. And those are the things that you kind of need. But a therapist, you want certain guideposts, you want certain references. And John, I do want to say, do not use your lawyer as a therapist. Do not, because they're fucking expensive. I know, because I am one. But, I heard my lawyer, while I was talking to her, venting therapeutically, I hear this in the background. She's not listening to me. Oh, yeah, there's no therapy involved with your lawyer. We're I can empathize maybe differently than other lawyers can, but my goal is to help you. And I best can help you by saying, hey, listen, don't spend your time and your money with me on this issue. I'm not going to get you through this. You need to work on this with somebody who can help you. And, going back to me, John, when I changed the profession, I found that stable. I told you I didn't have anybody who was going through it. So I found that stable of people that I now sort of give to my clients, whether it's a nutritionist or a therapist or somebody for your mortgage or somebody for your will, those types of things, that repository of information where you're not looking at an ad or going to Google, like you said, those types of things. So, how can that lawyer help you? And these are questions I didn't ask. I didn't ask, what do you see as a possible outcome? What's the time frame you think? And I remember my wife coming back at the time and saying, listen, she took $7,500, but she promised we'll be divorced by the summer. I was like, okay, that's great. It was like June. It took a year and a half, 2 years, like I can't even tell you how much it cost. Well, I can, but I won't. But it's like, let's just say my one kid could have gone to a better college, but it's, really ask questions. You're smart. You know what's going on. Don't turn this over. Right.
Yeah, it is so important. I mean, I think not using your attorney as a therapist is probably the number one bit of advice to anyone going through a contested divorce.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Not only are they expensive, But you said this not quite as direct as I'm going to say. Your attorney just doesn't care. I mean, I don't mean that in a way that they
I
don't care about you as a
disagree.
person,
Yeah.
but most attorneys, because attorneys are busy, just like
Yeah.
everyone, every other
Yeah.
professional. And if you're sitting there telling them the same story, like I had this guy one time, I'll never forget it. His wife had an affair with the neighbor that lived behind them. And didn't matter what I called about. It didn't matter if it was calling about just something small or big. I heard the story again. And every time it would change a little bit, it would have a little different, but it was like every single time. And I'll never forget every time a bill went out, he was very upset about the bill. And every time I'd be like, okay, stop telling me the same stories and your bill will be less because I'm not going to not bill you for you because you're using the time that I would use to work on something else
You're
for one
correct.
of my clients. And it's not that I'm not being mean. I'm not being some greedy attorney. I'm trying to focus, this client on what's important and remind them there are therapists, there are support groups, there are divorce coaches, there are tons of other people out there that you can talk to and work through these issues that you're going through. Because really, at its core, it's anger. You're angry about what's happening to you. You're angry about what your spouse is putting you through.
Yeah.
And we could go on and on about personal responsibility too, but I find a lot of people going through divorce don't take personal responsibility for what's going on in their life.
Right.
All someone else's fault.
Right.
Like I know, we talk about affairs. Okay, someone had an affair, but you didn't force them to have an affair, but your marriage wasn't that great. Otherwise, the affair wouldn't have happened. Something
Right.
was going on. And I think what ends up happening, you had a therapist, and that's great. And you just need somebody that's not your attorney. And
Correct. And you
so,
don't want it to be your brother, your sister, your best friend. You're going to
no,
ruin the
no.
relationship.
Well, but isn't that the problem? Like, men, a lot of men listen to this, Scott, and one of the issues men have in general, particularly men of a certain age, we're
Mhm.
both in that age group. A lot of men have a hard time having good friendships with other men. And
Yeah.
by good friendships, I don't mean, going out and watching a
Right.
football game and having a beer. I'm talking about talking about things, like actually talking about personal things with a friend so you can, vent a little bit. Women are great at this. I mean, women
Yeah.
will, do this till the end of time. And this is why I think a lot of guys feel so lonely going through divorce is because they don't have that same outlet or they just don't feel comfortable talking to their guy friends.
It's
Um,
interesting. It's interesting. I just recently lost a very close friend, a great, great person. And, there were five of us that went out to breakfast and, we were talking and I got to a point and I said something. I probably won't say it as profoundly as I did then, but I found as a guy, it was weird because I can't talk to my parents because then they'll worry. I can't talk to my spouse or significant other because then I'll seem weak. I can't talk to my children because they see me still as Superman. And I can't talk to my friends because they don't want to deal with it. So it's like I don't have an outlet for these types of emotions, even though it's 2023, and even though it is a little bit tougher for us, if you will, to do those types of things. And the next thing I know, after I said that, one of my friends got up from across the table, started crying as he was walking over to me, and hugged me. And then I started crying, and then I started feeling weird. Meanwhile, like if we were a couple of ladies, this would have been like the most touching thing. We would have watched Golden Girls and it would have been great. But, I didn't live in that moment and emote. And I did later and, that kind of thing. But it's like, it's okay to feel. This sucks. And, guys, we're kind of fight or flight. We want to go to our man cave or we want to fight it. Like, if you process and go through some of these emotions, whether with a professional or other, you may be able to see more, have more peripheral vision and distance vision and clarity in terms of what this is and what this needs to be. Maybe that helps. I don't know, but
No, that's so completely true. I will
yeah,
tell you, it's interesting. I think anyone around our age, Scott, really should just look and see how younger guys now
yeah, totally,
relate to each other, because there is a generational issue here.
yeah,
I feel like men of a certain age, there's a little bit more macho stuff happening. There's a little
yeah,
bit
yeah,
more, where
We were in that transition age,
Yeah,
though. I think
we're right on the
I can
cusp.
fix an engine if you tell me, but
Well, you talk to guys like in their 20s now, and
yeah,
they're very comfortable hugging each other, crying with each other. They're all comfortable with it now. So, I mean, to some degree, that's sort of changing. But the thing is, a lot of men, and we're lucky enough to live in a very urban area where, there's people everywhere. But, most our country's huge, and a lot of people live in places that are isolated, where they live in smaller towns where they know everybody. And
yeah,
and they certainly don't want the whole town knowing their business. And
right.
like it's hard, and divorce is hard. I get it. It's really difficult, but don't feel like there's nothing you can do. And I think that's a good thing of what we've been talking about is there are solutions. There's things you can do out there. There's people you can find to help you through this, but just take ownership of it. It's happening. I don't know. You said that your wife basically initiated or said, I want a divorce. Do you remember how she told you that? And do you remember what your first reaction was whenever that went down?
It's funny that in over a decade, I think that's the first time anybody's asked me that question, and I'm trying to think, and I don't have a recollection of it. I'm sorry, I don't. I do remember when I was committed to it, but I don't remember what that was. That sort of, I don't think there was an aha, or she said, "That's it, we're done," or something to that effect. It was like a slow burn for quite a while, and then I think it just eventually, like I said, it was just a matter of I can't do this anymore, and just wound up filing. It wasn't like I'm. One thing I will say, if a woman does say to you that she wants a divorce, the coffin's been sealed 9 times out of 10. If a guy says that, if we're so bold to say that, they can still get you back. It's true. So, those types of things. But I don't remember.
Well, that's okay. But I mean, so after that sort of those initial conversations happen, or after the announcement happened, how long was it until you guys lawyered up and the legal process started?
I mean, there was an escalation. It wasn't like we were reasonable with each other. I was a different person at that time, the different frame of life. There were a lot of arguing, a lot of fighting, a lot of just, no, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Lack of accountability or ability to see that, like I said earlier, I'm just not going to change the way she's thinking. And it doesn't sound like I'm changing the way I'm thinking. So I got to work on myself. And from the time we lawyered up until the time it was done was way too long, way too expensive. I wasn't getting, like you had said before, John, one of the things I want to touch on is nobody knows your case better than you do. And your lawyer, no matter how much they're on your side and by your side, you almost can't get frustrated with them if you haven't spoken in a couple of weeks and you just expect them to remember tomorrow is your daughter's birthday or whatever it is. And what are we doing for the party? Like, you've got to do your job, which is keeping them abreast of the situation, your lawyer abreast, but being bullet point like think about an elevator pitch, like, hey, Scott, just to bring you up to date, because before you and I speak, I'm going to do sort of go through my flow chart, my last notes. But if you've sent me 42 emails in the last 3 days and each of them, I have to scroll through, you're going to be disappointed. I just don't have that ability to bring it up to speed. Now, I'm not going to forget you got a daughter or forget what the issues are, but what's urgent and important to you, it's not that I'm forgetting, or it's not that it isn't urgent and important to me. It's just that you're not my only divorce. I'm speaking for a lawyer in general. And so, if it seems like I'm not on your side, that's not the case, but I'm trying to help a lot of people a lot of time. So, you can always get your lawyer to jump, but sometimes if you're one of those people who kind of cry wolf, then the lawyer's going to know what your role in this is. So what I always tell people, and I try and tell them from the outset, is look, we've got to continue to touch base. It's going to be a lot early and very often, but as this thing progresses and as this thing goes through, let's set up some time. Let's set up some intervals. Why don't we look at every 2 weeks we get together for an hour, just an update. If we need to cancel, we cancel. If we need it sooner, we'll make it sooner. But at least we have each of us accountable, as opposed to you calling in when I'm in the middle of court and pissed that I can't get on the phone with you, or you're emailing me saying, can we get together tomorrow? Because the odds are I can't. So, I try and create sort of a template of information flow.
Well, I think a
Don't,
lot. I think
yeah,
just to on that point, I think a lot of the problem is people don't understand what the role of their attorney is in their divorce, and
mhm,
also attorneys don't adequately put together a strategy that the client understands. And
mhm.
I really am a firm believer that every divorce should start with a strategy session where it's not about how much alimony you're going to get, how much
Right,
child support, none of that crap. Just here's what you can expect to happen. These are the dates that things are, or these are the, within 3 months, this is going to happen and this is going to
oh,
happen.
right,
I think a lot of times clients they just don't know. And then they get frustrated. Then they're calling their attorney because nothing's happening because the attorney didn't tell them here after we file this, nothing's going to happen for like
right,
6 weeks, but don't be alarmed. And I think a lot of times, and this goes back to choosing an attorney, you need an attorney. It's much less about what the attorney says they're going to get for you. And it's much more about finding someone that you feel comfortable with, that you feel like is going to communicate with you.
right.
As divorce, let's be honest, most divorces are all going to end within a range that just about any good attorney can tell you. So
Correct.
really, it's about somebody that's going to make you feel like you're getting through the process in a way that at the end you can at least look back and say, you know what? I have no regrets. I feel good about this, as opposed to being mad at your attorney because it cost too
Yeah,
much, or they
yeah,
didn't fight for me, or whatever other things that people say. And so when you go talk to attorneys, you really need to be thinking about things beyond what are they going to do for you? What are they going to
right.
get for you? And I don't think many people do that. I really don't. And part of one of the things I really want to hope that we can convey to people through education, like this podcast and other things, is you really need to have a more expansive view of things like an attorney, and more expansive about the divorce as being more than just an attorney, that you need to have other professionals involved, because I think so many people are just very focused in, okay, I'm getting a divorce, I go hire an attorney and the attorney just does everything for me and I sit back,
Right.
and just let it happen. And if you take that approach, I can promise you more often than not you're going to be disappointed at the end, because you cannot be an observer of your own life. You've got to be proactive. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
but
be organized too. Get your stuff together. Don't just piecemeal dump things to your attorney. Like, get your tax returns. Here's my 14, 15, 16, 17, whatever years. Here's my last 3 pay stubs. I'll give them you as I get new ones, I'll put them in our file. Whatever it is, like, don't expect to come in with a piece of, like, we're not your tax return guy where you just dump a million receipts, on them and have them organize it. I mean, I guess we can. It's just that you're going to pay for that. Like, let's have a shot sheet together. That CIS, the case information statement, John, like, I know it's a bear, but it really is sort of that, that backbone of what you said before, where it's going to be plus or minus. It even has your kids involved there, what your expenses are for them, et cetera, et cetera.
right. And just for people listening all over the country, it's called something different in every state.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
Sorry.
financial disclosure. It's where you have to disclose all of your assets and everything. But at the end of the day, I mean, I know, Scott, you said you were super organized during your divorce, making spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff
Yeah.
like that. You don't have to be like that, because not
No.
everyone's good, but you need to be organized. It's not that difficult. It really isn't. If you give 5 pay stubs to your attorney, put them in chronological order. Like just do things just to make your attorney's life a little bit easier, because I guarantee you it's going to help you. But I
Yeah.
do not want us to. I want to make sure we hit one more thing before
Oh,
we
sure.
say goodbye, and that's divorce mediation, because that's really, anyone who listens to this knows I harp on it every single podcast, because I just cannot stand it that people don't see that as option one all the time. That they
Mm-hmm.
automatically go to, we have to hire attorneys and file something with the court. Um, Tell me a little bit about. Well, I think we already kind of know what your viewpoint is on divorce mediation, but can you tell us a little bit about who do you think is a good candidate for mediation? Um, at what stage in divorce do you think people should do mediation? And tell us a little bit about how you actually do mediation.
Okay. Yeah, great. First of all, I'm going to start very simple. Unless somebody's like in an emergent state, your kids are fleeing the country, they're taking your kids out of the country, or somebody is, a drug user or whatever. I feel, or there's, abuse. Everybody should be a candidate for mediation. It is really it's the only time that you can help control your outcome, right? You don't have somebody that's sitting in a black robe that may have, gotten to a fender bender before sitting there. You think lawyers don't care about your cases? The judges care even less. They just want results. They're not going to listen. They're not going to sit there and hear your story. They're just going to rule. In mediation, you have a neutral third party that's helping you guide through your process. It's confidential. I mean, I'm sure you've heard John's other podcasts about it, but it is the best process to try and get resolved. And everybody looks at divorce as it's either litigated or it's mediated. That's not the case. I mean, even if we file for a divorce today, John, you could tell, at least in New Jersey, they're sending us to mediation for parenting time. And then regarding the economics, they're going to send us to an economic mediator, a rostered, mediator. So even if you have lawyers, the court's pushing alternative dispute resolution on you. Mediation is near and dear to my heart because it's a real collaborative way to divorce. When I am a mediator, one of the things I will say, John, I've seen this sort of shift to people going to mediation because it's cheaper. And you don't want that to be the impulse to your decision, because the mediator can't advise you to the law, right? They can't tell you, well, they can say what the law is, but they can't apply it necessarily to you, right? So the think of it like Rocky. The mediator's the referee against Apollo and Rocky, but he's not swinging or throwing punches or taking punches. He's just making sure that everybody's playing in the same ring, doing the same thing, not taking cheap shots, and hopefully at the end there's a resolve. When I'm a mediator, even in private mediation, one of the things I really love is for each of the parties to have their own lawyer, not with us. They don't have to be in the room with us. We don't need 5 people there. I don't need to separate you guys into your other rooms. I mean, you want someone, like we said before, that understands you're trying to resolve this amicably, quickly, correctly. And you want somebody who's sort of like a consulting type attorney, someone that can guide you, like John and I were saying before, in the best case, worst case scenario. And then if going with that Rocky scenario, which I've used before, is like, in between the rings, you go to talk to Mick. That's kind of what your lawyer is. Your lawyer doesn't have to sit there with the fancy suit and the nice tie and argue your points. Just gives you an idea, and then the two of you can go into that room with the mediator, knowing how the law may apply to you, your best case, your worst case, and you work things out. And with mediation, everything doesn't need to be resolved all at once. I'll get clients or couples that he'll say, I'd like the kids Wednesdays and Thursdays, and she'll say, you work in New York City, you're never home until 8:00. And he'll say, no, I can work from home now on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And forget COVID, but somebody would say that. And she'll say, no, you can't. And he'll say, yeah. And I'll say, well, how about this? Explain to us how that's going to work. Well, I'll just ask my boss if I can work from home on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Okay. Can you do that today? What do you mean? Can you do it tomorrow? When can you talk to your boss about this? I thought I'd do it after this is over. No. Why can't you do it tomorrow? And then assuming that you do get this, why don't we put this into play until we meet again in 2 weeks, right? You don't have to solve the entire thing right away. You can come up with little baby deals and see how they work and prove your points in a positive way instead of, arguing about them. So mediation to me is the ultimate way to sort of get everything out on the table, put it all in the middle, create some horse trades, and go from there. The problem with, not having attorneys at all, or at least somebody to consult with, John, in my opinion, is once that toothpaste is out of the tube, that's really hard to put back in. So let's say she makes $1 million a year, he makes $50,000 a year, and he says, I don't want alimony. Or she says, I'm not paying him alimony. And I'm the mediator. I'm going, have you guys talked to anybody about this? I can't say no. I could flip a coin for you, but I can't say no. But if I write that up in your memorandum, and then you go to attorneys, or somebody's going to say this is bull, and they're going to blow the whole thing up. So wouldn't it be better to understand your rights and your as you're going through those types of things? Certain things you don't need the attorney for at all, right? If we're mediating, other than to help with the finalization of it. And I know, John, you and I have different views on the finalization part, but there's a lot of things that you can work out alone, and anything you can't work out, stick a pin in it, bring it back to the end, and if you need to bring the lawyers in at that time, great. But think about how much you've gone through and sort of lowered the animosity and worked through certain things that you couldn't do it if you were in a litigious type environment where you're going to court and nobody's making these types of suggestions. Try it, see if it can work. In mediation, I need to get out of the house. The lawyer may say, oh, you shouldn't leave the house. But in mediation, be like, listen, I got to get him out of the house. It's just not comfortable. Well, I can throw you a million different suggestions or ideas and say, well, what does that mean to you? Explain that to me. And then we can come to something which says, it's not that they need you to get out of the house. It's just the two of you can't be in the house together. Okay, so let's figure that out. What can we do? What options do we have? And working through those things. It's not Dr. Phil, I'm not your therapist, but I've done so many of these at this point where I can say, hey, what if one of you takes the basement for a week, the other one's in the master? Or what if the other one, your sister lives close by? What if you live there for a couple of days? Oh, your brother lives by? And then you alternate so the kids aren't bouncing around while you figure this out. Those types of things. There's just, mediation is just a way to conservatively and quietly get through everything that's going to get you to the resolve. More importantly, I find that when people are making their own decisions, you're much more inclined to sort of follow that. And I'll always say, look, our goal is to get an agreement here, stick it in the drawer and never look at it again, right? Because you made this, you've come up with this. So if it's not working, how do you talk to each other? Because, in a litigious divorce, everybody's reading that paper. I have them at 11 o'clock Thanksgiving this year because you hate each other and the divorce robbed you of everything and the ability to talk. But, you go through mediation, you do it amicably. You'd be like, hey, my sister's in from Seattle. Is it cool? I know it's your Thanksgiving, but can I keep him till 1? And, if you get along, be like, listen, just keep him. I love your sister. I know she was there for you. They love her. Keep them. We'll figure it out. Or I'll ask my family if we can do Thanksgiving on Friday. You never know. I mean, I know it may sound crazy, but if you're able to communicate and able to co-parent and able to move through these things, it's just a different story. I like seeing you better, John. I hate staring at me.
So. Well, I could not agree with everything you said more. I will tell you, I think one of the things, because you just indicated we have a little bit different mediation styles, but it's just like attorneys. Whenever you're talking to someone who's going to be mediating your case, make sure you understand what it is that they are going to do or what their style is or, what's going to happen. I mean, there's some mediators that are much more kind of sit back and help you guys reach an agreement. There's others that are very direct and say, bring you in a room and say, you're full of shit. This is what, why in the hell are you asking for this? That's such bullshit.
I'm not that bad, but I also am not going to be like, how does it make you feel when he says that? That's not
none of that.
I mean, that example that I gave before, I would never let happen, $1 million waiving alimony. I'd be like, but at the same time, I'll call people out on their stuff, but I'll also say, call me out. If you think, I'm working for you. If you think I'm like on John's side, say, Scott, shut the fuck up. I'm tired of this. I'll be like, whoa, okay, wait, what made you feel that? Yell at me. I don't care. This isn't my life. This is yours. If you feel like this is not neutral, tell me about it. Let's talk about it. Let's work through it.
What's really interesting, I've encountered this a lot more recently. I don't know if you have, where people will tell me, listen, we know there should be alimony, right, but we have no idea how long or how much. What do you think, John?
Yeah.
And
you're right.
And I used to be very much hands off and say, that's not my place. But I've sort of changed my opinion a little bit, where if both people are sitting there staring at me and they tell me they both want me to give my opinion, I almost will treat it like I'm almost like a non-binding arbiter. And I'll just say, well, listen, guys, since you asked me, and I never give a number or a date, I'll give like some ranges based on just, like almost like I'm sitting, anyone listening to this will not understand what I'm talking about, but as an ESP panelist, which is basically part of our process in New Jersey, where some attorneys will give opinions about how your case should resolve. I almost sometimes do that because I look at being a mediator as I'm a problem solver. I'm here to help these two people who have a simple divorce. I mean, the example you gave of $1 million and a $50,000, I don't think that would ever end up in mediation without attorneys to begin with. It could, but I'm talking about the two people who maybe make like 80 and 50, and they've got 2 kids and 2 cars, 1 401k and a house, like where it's like,
I love those. So like with those, like when we talk about alimony or we talk about child support, it's so easy to go to in New Jersey, a child support calculator, or go to the 14 factors of the rule of thumb. But I'll say, hey, listen, you really want to get to numbers. Let's figure out how you're living. Let's do a budget. What is it going to cost you to live alone, not live separate, 2 households? What's it going to cost for the kids? And let's figure out how can we best equalize that? Forget alimony, forget child support. Conceptually, let's see how much it's going to cost for you to live, because nobody should get unjust enrichment post-divorce, right? But if somebody's making $80,000 during the divorce, and then 5 years after the divorce is now making $200,000, like, good for that person. Almost like that's how life goes. You should figure out what it is within the marriage, what it needs to be outside the marriage, and whatever. And I'll also talk to I'll do like you, John. I'll be like, well, what do you think your best case scenario is? I'll throw it back on them, and I'll be like, you've been married 8 years. What's your best case? Lifetime alimony. That's not happening. I'll say it like that, like, or what's your, best case scenario? No alimony. Okay, so somewhere between lifetime and, whatever. But let's, and, you kind of help them narrow it down. But again, I go back to, if they each have an attorney, and the attorney I'm talking about in consulting base, John, is like, not taking a $7,500 retainer, maybe a small retainer, and working on an hourly one-off basis, and literally saying, look, you range from alimony. If you're making 80, he's making 50, and you've been married for 8 years, look, it's a short-term marriage, maybe half the marriage, maybe 20 to 25% of the difference in the salary. That should be your go point. That's where I imagine the mediator is going to end up, or something to that effect. At least
those of you listening in other parts of the country, don't have a heart attack by what Scott just said. That's just that's alimony in New Jersey, which
it's not even. It's like a rule of thumb. I'm just cutting to the chase.
No. Well, it's funny, Scott, because I talk to people all over the country.
Yeah.
New Jersey is like the most alimony hungry state that in the country. It's insane. Really? I mean, like, you go down to the South. I'll take Texas, for example.
Like Texas. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, unless you're married 10 years, forget it.
None.
Forget it. And then you go to like states, I think Massachusetts is one. They have guidelines for alimony just like they do child support. And so there's much less fighting going on just because people. So, but that just goes to show, that a lot of times your experience with the numbers and everything with divorce will be very different state to state. So you really shouldn't listen to someone's advice that lives in a different state.
Yeah, don't read, on the Google. Another thing that's important that I always see, John, I'm sure you do too, is, I had a house before we got married, and then I sold the house and I put that money into this house, and I want that back. Like, that's going to be specific to your state. But if, you had an inheritance, if you had that type of money, find that stuff. Yeah. Don't wait for me to tell you. Like, if you started a 401k in 2000 and didn't get married till 2011, find that statement from the month before you were born. That's important shit. And don't make me chase you for it,
it's so important. It's so important.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, this hour has flown by.
Yeah.
We could talk a lot longer, but I know you just started a new association with the new firm. So tell our listeners, number one, obviously you're in New Jersey. So I guess tell our listeners, number one, what area you serve, and number two, how people would contact you if they're interested in your services.
Yeah, I appreciate that, John. I'm very lucky. My partners, David Torchin, Brian Martell, and myself, Scott Orr, we started our new firm, TMO Law. We're based out of Bergen County, New Jersey, but we operate all around New Jersey. We also have New York, Colorado, Florida, and District of Columbia within our practice. But mainly we focus on New Jersey law. We are, well-versed in all areas, pre-judgment, post-judgment, mediation, arbitration, litigation, mediation. Did I say mediation? I don't know. We need to say it. We need to keep
Well, I hope
saying it.
you're still mediating, Scott. Otherwise, this
Oh, yeah.
conversation is a
No,
waste.
like I said, hey, I think that wherever, I don't know how to do it, but yeah, no, that's where it should be. Look, at the end of the day, you don't have to look for me. You don't have to look for John. You don't have to look. You just have to understand that this is your divorce, and how do you want that to be? And what John was saying, if you're fearful of divorce, work through that with somebody, because you have to understand what those fears are. I can't help you. John probably can't help you. We can guess, but that's not what we're schooled in. And once you're ready for it, then we can help. And listen to your lawyer. Your lawyer doesn't give you bullshit, thing that says, don't do this, don't do that. Don't do it.
Right? Yeah. And actually listen. Don't hear what you want to hear. Listen to what they actually say, because that more often than not, that's a problem. Well, Scott, thank you so much for being here. I love this conversation. I wish we could go longer, but I'm sure people are tired of hearing our voices at this point.
Yeah, I know I am here my own, but I'd love to come back. John, I get my partners involved too. I appreciate what you're doing for everybody. And look, anybody who reaches out to me, John's a great resource, a great guy. And, I'm going to be utilizing him for many different areas of my practice going forward, from the divorce coaching standpoint to a possible mediator, et cetera, even as that consulting lawyer that we talked about. Just get your team and trust your team.
Yeah, it's so important. Well, thank you for all that, Scott. All right. And we'll see everyone next time.